Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
The Dogman Only I Can See, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. There's a dogman living on our property, but my wife can't see it, and my friends can't see it. My kids can't see it, and our neighbors don't see it either. My wife wanted me to see a shrink about it, so I stopped talking about it, but it's still there, believe me. It's a really tall, really dark, really ugly kind of a monster. And I think it's one of those parasite-type creatures that live off of our fear. Maybe this one lives off of making people wonder if they're losing their minds. We've lived here 3 years, 2 months, and 15 days as I type this email to you. I keep count of every hour since we moved in because that's the time I first saw the Dogman. I didn't see it outside the house. I didn't see it in the backyard. I didn't see it on the roof or down the block. I saw it in my bedroom. This was our first night in the house, and we had celebrated a bit. The kids weren't moving in till the next day. They were staying with their aunt. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and needed to use the men's room. When I got back into our bedroom, there, standing in the dark, facing away from me and toward my sleeping wife, was a giant, standing shadow of a dog. I gasped and I stepped back into the hallway. The shadow turned to face me briefly, and I could see its eyes literally burning bright red, like turn signals on the back of a car. When it turned back around, I saw it in one move slide through the window next to the bed and disappear outside. I ran to the window to close it behind the monster, but I received another jolt as I discovered that the window had never been open. I tried to pull it up, but it was locked. I figured I must be having a dream of some sort, a waking dream. It took me a long time to get back to sleep, but I had to laugh at myself and chalk it up to some kind of sleep paralysis minus the paralysis. The next time I came face to face with the entity was in the middle of the day, though, and I am certain I wasn't dreaming. It was the scariest thing that had happened to me up to that point, and it altered how I live my life ever since then. Here's what happened. We have a brick garage toward the back of our property with a wooden roof. It goes almost all the way up to a wooden picket fence behind it, but there's just enough room to squeeze in there if you need to. Our dog's ball rolled back there when we were playing, so I slid myself into the space. I tried to get the ball, but only pushed it further in. It required me doing this extreme sideways bending with one of my feet ending up over my head, but eventually I got that ball. When I righted myself, I looked back toward the yard to ready myself for the sliding back out part. That is when I saw the last thing in the world that I expected to see. Right there, at the opening to my backyard, was the 7-foot tall, dog-headed beast man from my sleep paralysis that first night, blocking out all the light. It caught my eye and snarled and growled, reaching in to try to get at me. I screamed like a little baby and pulled myself as far from the animal as I could. I closed my eyes and cried, knowing that sooner or later, that thing was going to reach me, and there was nothing I could do about it. So, of course, that's how my wife discovered me, weeping and shivering behind the garage, saying some nonsense about a giant werewolf that wanted to have me for dinner. The way I found out that I'm the only one who can see the Dogman is that it appeared at my sister's wedding, which we held in our backyard. The Dogman stood right at the edge of the woodline in the middle of the day for everyone to see, and yet I was the only one who saw it. I pointed it out to my wife, my sister-in-law, and a number of the guests invited. The thing wasn't more than 300 or 350 feet away in broad daylight, yet everyone told me that all they could see was a bunch of trees. This 7-foot-tall monster was standing right there, grinning and panting, and nobody was even noticing it. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the strangest thing that I had ever experienced. I realized this thing might make me start to get paranoid, and that I had to make certain I kept a firm grip on my sanity. That's why it didn't help that my mom passed away soon after that, and then my father moved in with us for a while. Fortunately, it wasn't a long period, but it was hectic while it lasted. My father is not the most emotionally supportive person in the world, and he usually can do things which damage my self-esteem. In fact, he really enjoys doing that to me, but I was braced for him and made a conscious effort to treat myself with self-respect in front of him and not allow him to behave in a hurtful way in my presence or in front of my family. Everything was going in a surprisingly mature way until the first night he was there, when I took out the garbage. It was pretty dark out as I carried the 2 big plastic bags around to the cans on the side of the house. Of course, when I rounded the corner, that dog thing was there. I could smell it as I rounded the corner, then bam, I was presented with a wall of hair. Backing away and looking up, I saw it. It was the giant Dogman, and it was drooling on me. I made it back into the house, but my knees gave out as I locked the back door. Unfortunately for me, my family witnessed this. Now here came the insults from my father, mocking me for being scared like a baby. My kids told him I was scared of a werewolf, and that was it for me. On came the derisive laughter, on came the hurtful jokes. Then came my own family joining in with my father to mock and belittle me. I started thinking maybe I should have just let the Wolfman catch me. So now I never tell any of them when I see that thing. One time, I was jogging in the area around here. I normally jog at the gym in my workplace, but I was off that week, and I felt I needed to go for a run. I wasn't even thinking about the stupid Dogman. I was just running and enjoying the beautiful autumn day. But I guess the Dogman was thinking about me, because suddenly, there he was, behind me, running along the track. He was growling and occasionally barking. I felt like I was going to be sick. I was so scared. I prayed for someone to come along so that I wouldn't be alone. Then, off in the distance, I saw someone jogging in my direction. She got closer, but she was smiling at me. Then she waved. She was acting as though everything were normal and there wasn't a giant dog running behind me on its hind legs, looking angry. Of course, nobody but me could see the beast. It kept running after me the entire way. When I would slow down, it would speed up and start reaching out to grab me. I would speed up, and it would ease up a little. The thing was just toying with me, keeping me terrified the entire run back to my car. When I got inside, I could barely lock the door before falling on my back and gasping for air. When I could think straight again, I looked around. Sure enough, there was the Wolfman standing at the edge of the woods. He hadn't entered into the parking lot, but he hadn't left either. He just stood there, sort of grinning at me as he panted. He had no reason to hide. No one else could see him anyway. For a while I started to think that, since no one else could see it, maybe it didn't actually have a solid form. Maybe it couldn't do anything to hurt me. So maybe I shouldn't really be scared of it. And then one morning, I awoke to find all of the clothes in my closet torn to shreds. Every shirt in my drawers, every pair of underpants, forget it, all ripped up, then put back in place nicely. My wife thought I did it myself, of course. I knew who did it, though. So, this thing is kind of like a poltergeist in that sense, but it manifests as a dogman. Can it affect our reality? Most definitely. Could it hurt me? I would say it could if it wanted to. If it needed to. If I wasn't scared enough already. This situation is not good for my marriage. It's not good for my kids. And it's not good for my relationship with my kids. My father calls me immature, and I have run out of arguments to counter his. It's time to do something, and as my father says, a real man knows what to do and when to do it. But it must not be time yet because I haven't got the vaguest idea what to do.
OMG, where are you gonna be Thanksgiving weekend? Stuck with your family? Talking about politics? Or will you be having fun at the Northeast Comic Con in beautiful Massachusetts, USA? Meet Billy West from Futurama. Meet Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Meet legends of the movies and the comic booklets and the TV. Plus, a comedian standing-up show starring real comedians, yo! All this, plus an excuse to get away before Uncle Ned starts blaming your generation for everything over the pumpkin pie. That's the Northeast Comic Con Thanksgiving weekend, presented by the real original Gary Summers from the Antiques Roadshow, yo! OMG, hooray!
Dogman UFO Connection? Not what you'd think. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by Retribution. Dear Scary Stories, I have a story from my family history that I hope you want to tell. It's a story about my Uncle Phil and the time he was, as he says, abducted by aliens and werewolves. But this isn't just a story passed down by word of mouth anymore, as I discovered new evidence that casts the entire episode in a very surprising new light. So, the story as it had been passed down was that Uncle Phil had been out partying, and on the way home, he got hit with a very bright light from directly above. He smelled something strange, almost like air freshener, and the next thing he knew, he was in a tiny, one-room UFO. There were werewolves stationed as guards, and a reptilian figure leaning over him that the others called Doctor. Since the Doctor supposedly had a German accent, this was the point in the story when someone in my family would crack a joke that it was probably Dr. Freud, and that all Uncle Phil was remembering was a trip to the shrink. At this stage in the narrative of most alien abductions, descriptions of horrifying medical procedures take place. Not in my Uncle Phil's story, however. In his abduction, the UFO landed and he ran away, only to be followed and tracked through the forest by the werewolves, who he sometimes described as dog-headed men in military-style fatigues, and other times as giant, feral wolves. I heard this story 4 or 5 times, but only once when Uncle Phil was actually there, and he mostly stayed quiet, unhappy that he was getting mocked. In the last few years of his life, he wouldn't even tell the story at all any longer because he was sick of getting made fun of. The thing is, that didn't stop them. They made fun of him anyway. So it turns out Uncle Phil kept a diary for a few years in the 1960s, and 5 volumes of them were discovered after his death. They passed through various people's hands, then ended up in mine, just because everyone felt I'd have the most interest in them. It turns out he wrote in detail about the event in question, and what he wrote raises as many questions as it answers. He also writes about certain related occurrences that happened afterward, which I don't think anyone else in the family knew about during his lifetime. My sister-in-law works in publishing, and we're trying to turn this all into a book, but I can give you a short version of it with the names left out. That way it can kind of be advanced secret viral marketing for our eventual book. Okay, first of all, according to my late great-uncle, the situation of first encountering the light on that night lasted for much longer than in any of the versions I heard from my family. Apparently, he stood there breathing in some kind of chemical that had a sweet odor to it for the better part of an hour before he said dog-headed men in coveralls climbed down from the sky on ropes. A harness was attached to him by the dog-headed people, and he was lifted up to the craft, hovering above him. He was not beamed up to the UFO, he was lifted up using a harness and ropes. Once on board, he said he laid down on his back, and a lizard-headed man leaned over him, examining him in some way. This was the doctor I referred to earlier, but in the diaries, Uncle Phil describes how the doctor would look like one of those lizards that have eyes which go in different directions. Then he would get angry and transform into a scary-looking bug-headed creature. In both cases, he was green. He would communicate to the werewolf guards in what seemed like German to Uncle Phil, and they would make dog noises in response. Uncle Phil said he could see out of the glass walls of the craft, and he saw that they were now coming out of the sky and landing in an area with a lot of trees in it. After landing, all the wolves and lizards were distracted, so Uncle Phil made a break for it. He skipped out from the UFO and ran through the woods, hoping to find some civilization and get away from his captors. This is where the story gets crazy, as sometimes he was being pursued by giant prehistoric wolves, and other times it was the dog-headed security people from the UFO. According to Uncle Phil's diary, they pursued him until dawn when he made it to a diner and ordered breakfast. He got a seat by the window and never saw the creatures approaching the place. He was able to make it home safely from there. Now, about 10 days after this happened, Uncle Phil got visited by 2 people claiming to be from the FBI. The diary entry claims that's where they said they were from. They wanted full details of everything he could remember about the craft and the aliens and the werewolves. He makes a crack in there about how the government people never laughed at him once or any of his answers, whereas his family laughs at everything he says. I don't think this was a Men in Black encounter, as the men in the story didn't threaten him or ask him to stop telling people the story. They just asked him questions, took notes in their little books, and politely left. They also looked like normal people as far as I can tell. He makes no indication that they seemed strange in any way. Now, here in 2018, Nick Redfern has a new book about this kind of subject, and in it, he provides new evidence that the very famous Antonio Villas-Boas UFO abduction may have been a case of government dosing an individual, inducing hallucinations, and taking them aboard a helicopter for examination. Just like my Uncle Phil, Villas-Boas could see through the walls of the craft, like a helicopter. Both stories also have the interesting opening scene where they seem to be getting exposed to some sort of chemical which might be consciousness altering. Who knows what actually happened after that point in both stories? Another similarity between the Villas-Boas case and my Uncle Phil is that both of them got visited by government agents afterward who wanted to know exactly what they thought happened. Maybe that was a follow-up on their own experiment? Could these have been the same people who abducted these men in the first place? Or could they have been agents investigating the handiwork of some other arm of the government? In the case of the werewolves my uncle saw, was he just seeing men and imagining they were wolfmen? If so, why were they all wolfmen? Why not different kinds of monsters? Or is it possible he was seeing some kind of entity that works with the government? Could Dogman be something that the government not only knows about, but even employs, or possibly helped create? The Villas-Boas case really was investigated by the FBI, and we know that because of the Freedom of Information Act. My family has applied for a release of any files about my Uncle Phil. I'm very curious if there's paperwork to back up my uncle's claims. If there is, you can bet you'll be hearing from me again. I'm the guy whose uncle got abducted by aliens and Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary. Come back for more scary stories.